In this video, we're going to show you how to break the primals apart as well as getting down into the retail cuts. The first step in cutting a pork carcass is going to be to remove the feet. This front foot we're going to take off right at the knee joint. The next step is going to be to separate the picnic shoulder and the Boston butt from the belly and the loin. And we do that by cutting between the second and third rib. The bones that we are cutting through are the backbone, as well as once we get a little deeper, we will hit the scapula or the shoulder blade. Now we have the Boston butt and the picnic shoulder separated from the rest of the carcass. The next step is going to be to remove the neck bones so that we can continue to separate the picnic shoulder and the Boston. One thing to be aware of is when you are cutting these cuts, sometimes small pieces of cartilage, like the one here, end up left on the meat. And it is important to trim those off so that it does not become a sensory issue later. In order to continue separating the picnic shoulder from the Boston butt, we are going to find the scapula, which is the shoulder blade. And we are going to go about 1 inch closer to the picnic shoulder to make this cut. We're not able to make this cut completely with a knife because there is still a bone that runs through this cut. Now we have the shoulder separated in 2 pieces. The picnic shoulder, which is generally sold either skin on or skin off, and it is usually sold as a roast. This piece can also be turned into trim, which can then be used for further processed products like broths. The Boston butt will be trimmed down a little bit more. We will take this back fat down to approximately 1/4 of an inch, and we will square it up so that we take off this little piece of jowl that's left. This is generally going to be marketed either boneless or bone-in, and is traditionally going to be used for pulled pork products. Now we're going to move on to the back portion of the carcass. The first thing that I'm going to do is remove this hind leg, and I'm going to do that directly at or above the hock joint. The next step is going to be removing the ham from the loin and the belly. To do this, we are going to locate the H bone, which is basically the hip bone that is split in half. I'm going to go between 1.5 and 3 inches closer to the anterior or the head of the carcass, and I'm going to make my cut there. The final step in cutting the primals apart is going to be to separate the loin from the belly. To do this, the first thing that we want to locate is the tenderloin, which runs underneath the loin section. This section here is what came off from the ham, and this section up here had the Boston butt and the picnic shoulder. So I'm going to take my knife and make a cut along the tenderloin, and then I'm going to finish the cut with my saw all the way up through the ribs. I'm going to take the base of the saw and make sure that it is right at where this first rib that's left on the belly meets up with the backbone. So after all of the cuts that have been made, you should have 5 portions left with your carcass. The Boston butt, the picnic shoulder, the loin, the belly, and the ham. In this video, we are going to be doing the breakdown of a bone-in pork loin. The first thing that I'm going to do is remove the hanging tender and the diaphragm. These structures in the living animal are what helps separate the lungs and the heart and trachea from the digestive system. We do not need to keep them on the bone-in pork loin. The pork loin then can be separated into three portions. The anterior portion that was closer to the head of the animal is the blade portion. The middle is the center section, and this end portion is the sirloin section that was closer to the ham. To make these cuts, I'm going to leave 8 ribs in this center section, counting from the posterior end or closer to the ham. So here's my first rib, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm going to make my cut between that 8th and 9th rib. Within this portion, we see that we still have the scapula or the blade bone. This portion can be used for several things. We can make blade chops, where we would just take this and cut it into chops of your desired thickness. Or we can turn this into a boneless chef's prime roast, which is where we would only keep this loin eye muscle right there. Now for the center section, to remove it from the sirloin, we're going to find the last lumbar vertebra, which is the last vertebrae that is running parallel with the length of the loin, and we are going to split it in half. So this center loin section can then be portioned into bone-in loin roasts, or we can cut it into bone-in pork chops. The sirloin portion, we can either cut it into sirloin chops, or we can remove these bones and we can make sirloin cutlets. To make the sirloin cutlets, we're going to first start by removing this entire bone section. This is all one bone, and it is all connected. So it is a little bit difficult to remove if you're not used to the shape. Now this section that's remaining can become either a boneless sirloin roast or sirloin cutlets, like these here. The rest of the sirloin can then be turned into trim to be used for other processed products. To make this blade section into a chef's prime roast, the first thing that we are going to do is remove the backbones and the rib. To do that, we are going to take our knife and cut directly under the ribs and follow them out by the backbone. The portion that we want to keep is this loin eye muscle right here, as well as this spinalis or cap muscle that is right there. This portion is very easy to separate, and you can do so just by using your fingers and following the seam. So this cut that we have here can be a chef's prime roast, or it can be cut into boneless blade chops. This portion can then be turned into trim. In this video, we're going to discuss the cutting of a pork belly. After a belly has been skinned, the first thing that you want to take note of is whether this carcass was from a gilt or a female, or a barrow, which is a male. If it was from a gilt, we need to be aware of the fact that there could be mammary tissue left under the belly line of that carcass, and that needs to be trimmed off before we go into any further processing. The next step for cutting a belly is to remove the spare ribs. So the spare ribs lie alongside the belly, and they are one large slab. Depending on what you're more interested in, if you like thicker bacon slices or if you like thicker ribs, that's going to determine how closely you cut to the spare ribs when you're removing them. Personally, we like to have thicker bellies, so I'm going to cut very close to these spare rib bones. And all I'm going to do is take my knife and go directly underneath those bones. Once you get far enough back into the belly, you're going to see a pocket open up, such as this one right here. And that pocket runs with the cartilage all the way around the rib bones, and that's what you're going to follow as you remove these spare ribs. The next thing that you can do for the belly is square it up. So these pieces on the end here are not going to make very good bacon. So we're going to go ahead and cut them off. The other thing that you need to look for is there are lymph nodes on the posterior end of the belly, such as this one here. And what they are is a kind of a grayish green blob. That's how you can recognize them. And you just want to make sure that you cut them out so it's not in your trim or your bacon. The portion that you remove from the belly can then be turned into your trim. And then I'm also going to take a little bit of this leaf fat off, which is the fat that sits right on top of the belly. It does not make good bacon, and it doesn't need to stay on the belly either. Then I'm going to finish squaring up the belly on the top. And that belly is going to be ready to turn into bacon. Or if you choose not to cure your bellies, this slab is also known as fresh side. The last primal that we're going to be cutting is the ham. The first thing that I want to do is remove the H-bone. The H-bone is essentially the pelvic bone, and it is attached, it comes out both sides here, so we need to remove it. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to trace it, and it goes down quite a bit deeper than you would expect it to. And then I'm going to come alongside, coming out to the front where you can see the bone on the face of the ham. What you are looking for is the ball and socket joint, that is the hip joint, and you are going to have to get your knife into it to break it. There's connective tissue that holds both of those bones together that you are going to have to cut. You can see right here that connective tissue that holds those two bones together. The next thing that I'm going to do is take the inside ham off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the seam from underneath the inside ham, and I'm going to follow it all the way across. The next cut that I'm going to make is going to be taking off the ham eye, which is this muscle that runs along the side here. As you can see, the ham is a pretty easy cut to get through, as there's essentially only 4 main muscles that we have to remove. The next step is going to be removing the knuckle, which is this portion up here. I'm going to do that by going along this femur bone that runs through the length of this ham. Towards the side here, you're going to end up at that knee joint that you're going to have to cut around. You know that you've cut deep enough underneath this femur when you can stick your hand in and find a pocket that is essentially a connective tissue pocket of heavy connective tissue that you're going to be able to find very easily. So there is the ham knuckle. The next thing that I'm going to do is remove the bones here, so this femur bone as well as the rest of this leg. So again, I'm going to go underneath the femur and remove it. And then I'm going to peel back along these muscles here in order to pull the rest of the shank off. Again, when it comes to the ham, you should be able to find seams relatively easily. Okay. Final portion is going to be to remove this heel muscle as well. So what I've got left here is the outside ham. The outside ham and the inside ham are very commonly used for your boneless ham cuts. In order to be able to use those, however, you're going to want to trim them up of additional connective tissue. So I'm just going to go through here and clean this up so it's down to those singular muscles. This connective tissue here is the stuff that I was talking about when removing the knuckle. You'll find that connective tissue pretty easily, and that's how you know you're in the right spot there. Whenever you're doing any kind of boneless ham, it's important to get the fat and connective tissue trimmed off of the outside because they will inhibit binding in your finished product. You also want to take the fat off of the outside. Most of these trimmings that I'm taking off, aside from the stuff that is very dense with connective tissue, can be going into your trim product. That looks pretty good there. With the inside ham, there is a cap muscle here called the gracilis. And for the most part, you're going to want to remove that if you're going to be doing a boneless ham because, again, there's that extra connective tissue between those muscles. Remove any of the dried portions as these have been aging in the cooler for a little while. And then going through and taking the connective tissue out from the inside. Some people do like to include that ham eye muscle that I removed second in part of their hams as well. Others like to sell them as ham grillers, basically a nice roast for small medallions, good portion control. So you can either clean it up so that it is just the single muscle without the external fat, or some processors, instead of messing with that, just put it straight into trim. For the most part, this knuckle section, a lot of processors just take that and put that into trim as well, but it can be sold as a roast. The final portion is the femur bone as well as the rest of the leg bone. For the most part, we're going to just trim those up and put that into trim. One of the things that we like to do is we actually take this femur portion, we separate the two bones, and we market this product as a dog bone for our customers, and they really like those as well. So there we have it. When it comes down to taking apart a ham, we have a decent amount of trim. We have the knuckle, which can be a pork roast. We have the eye of ham, which can also be sold just as is, or it can be put into trim. And then we have the inside and outside hams that are really good for boneless hams.